It's time for this week's episode of Brandon Sports Talk, featuring in-depth interviews from those who are trending in the world of athletics. And now, here's the host of Brandon Sports Talk, Brandon Pate.
Welcome back to Brandon Sports Talk. In today's episode, I have the privilege to interview the Los Angeles Sparks Public Relations Director and Relations, Taitana Lubanko. How are you doing today?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing good. Can you talk about how you knew that you wanted to work in professional sports?
Yeah, so I originally actually wanted to be an architect, and the longer that I looked at it and thought about it, and going into high school, having to look into like what your curriculum would be in school, I realized it necessarily wasn't for me. And so then I kind of just shifted to like, okay, what do I want to do? And it was kind of like, where does my passion lie? You know, everyone says that like you want to do something, your job you want to be passionate about. And so I've always been someone around sports, watching sports, listening to about sports, talking about sports. And so I kind of shifted there. And then from there was kind of figuring out, okay, like now I want to know, now I know I want to work in sports. Like, what do I want to do in sports? And then that's kind of where I found like that communications and social media side of things.
What was your time like working as the merchandising for the Anaheim Ducks?
Yeah, so right out of high school, I went to Cal State Fullerton for my undergrad, and I was like, okay, you know, I need a job. I can't necessarily get internships yet because I'm literally right out of high school. So I was like, what can I do that like will still be, I guess, enjoyable for me? And I actually found the merchandise position with the Anaheim Ducks, and I was like, yes, it's a retail job. No, it's not glamorous by any means, but I get to work for a professional sports team. I get to see what it's like to work for a professional sports team, be on the same schedule as what it would be like working for a team, as just, you know, the craziness of like playoffs and just different things like that. And so it again, like not glamorous by any means. It was a retail job, but it was just such a cool experience to be on that side of things. You know, I'm like, okay, at least if I'm doing something, I'm doing it in sports. And so I think it really kind of further solidified for me that like I liked working in sports. I liked being around that atmosphere.
How did you know personally that you wanted to work such a young age in professional sports?
Yeah, I think for me, it was just like, what am I passionate about? And so, you know, I was always the kid in, you know, middle school, elementary, high school. It was always like I did everything about sports. So, like, my first school projects in elementary and middle school, I did one on Kobe Bryant and I did another one on Muhammad Ali. So it's just that's always been like my thing, what I've loved to do. I was always the girl with the guys talking about sports. And so it was just something for me that I knew I had that passion for. And so it just kind of led me to figuring out, okay, now what do I want to do in the sports industry?
What were your roles with the Anaheim Ducks as the merchandise?
Yeah, so again, basically a retail job. So again, nothing super exciting, but it was just they had a team store, and so it was just working there and selling stuff while I was working there. And also, since it was at the Honda Center, we also were able to work concerts and selling merch there. So I got to work a bunch of cool different events, whether it be concerts, you know, like um, 21 Seconds to Summer, 21 Seconds to Mars, whatever that one is. I can't remember now. Just working, you know, again with artists and stuff like that. We did Chris Brown concerts, BTS, or moving it over to like events. So we worked like the bull riding competition. We worked one of like the Olympic tryout things that they went through before going to the Olympics and stuff. So it really, even though again was retail and it was just selling merchandise, it was really cool to be on the backside of things and just see things happen in real time.
What was it like to get the internship with the Los Angeles Sparks as the game day operations?
Yeah, so again, I wanted to work in sports, but I was like, okay, I think I want to do communications and like social, but like I wasn't 100% sure. And so I found this position doing game operations with the LA Sparks. And I was like, you know what? Like, I'm not 100% sure what I want to do yet. Like, let me go for it. Let me try it. And so I applied, and I really didn't even know what game operations was fully. Like, I told them in my interview, they're like, do you know what we do? And I'm like, not 100%. And so there I ended up getting the position, and that was just so eye-opening to see what happens really, really behind the scenes. Because game operations just entails, honestly, especially at Sparks, because it's a women's basketball team, and so it is a lot smaller of an organization versus an NBA or an NFL team. And so seeing that on how much this small team was in charge of, from stuff that happened before the game to everything that happened in between the game and everything that happened after, it was really eye-opening, and it was a super good experience just to figure out what it's like working in sports. And working, again, you're working with players, you're working with higher ups and stuff, and so just getting yourself involved in an organization, it was great. It was really a good experience for me.
What were your roles when working with the game day operations?
Yeah, so we did a lot, again, because it's just such a small team. And so it was my two bosses that were like, director, manager of game ops, and then just, I think it was like 8 of us interns. And so we did everything from the helping out with the national anthem, the halftime show, any of the timeouts that they did, any type of just giveaways, or like little like fun things that they did. So they grab a fan and be like, okay, you have to answer these questions and stuff. So like we had to do all that as far as finding the fan, making sure the fan's on camera, helping out with the in-arena announcer, making sure that he was where he needed to be and was doing what he needed to do at all the right times. It was really, again, like anything you can think of that happens during a game other than playing basketball was what we were in charge of. And so a lot of responsibility, but was just so eye-opening and so well worth it to get you experience.
What was your time like being a game night staff for the LA Clippers? And also, what did you do?
Yeah, so I went from the Sparks, and then someone who had worked at the Sparks previously, she had actually left the Sparks as an intern and got promoted to the Clippers in a different department from where I worked, but doing the same type of thing in the sense of game ops. So although like my position with the Clippers was like game night staff, it really was just a different sector of game operations. And so it was very similar to Sparks, but also very, very different, because again, Sparks had one team of like 8 interns that did everything that happened during a game, versus the Clippers, they had like 6 teams with like 6 interns each that were doing things. So it's like before we were, at Sparks, we were in charge of, halftime, we were in charge of giveaways, we were in charge of like corporate partnership stuff. And at Clippers, it's all divided. So it was like they had a corporate partnership team and a game operations team, a game entertainment team. And so I was part of the group events team. And there we managed anything that happened with large, large groups. So if it was a halftime show with a really large group, or a lot of times we had like fan tunnels where, the people would get to stand in the fan tunnel and like high five the players as they went out. Or something that we call anthem buddies. It's the kids that get to stand in front of the players during the national anthem. So like, again, setting up all those things and making sure they're running smoothly. So again, it was the same in the sense of like I had done that stuff previously at Sparks, but it was different because I went from having like 70 responsibilities to having like 5. So for me, it was a little bit slower of a pace, but it was nice because, you had that opportunity to really be like sure and certain and like precise with things, versus at Sparks, because we had so much stuff to do, we didn't always have the time to be the most precise or like give enough time for everything. Sometimes they were like, okay, I have 2 minutes to get ready for this, and then I have 5 minutes to get ready for the next thing, versus at Clippers, it was like, okay, I have 10 minutes to get ready for this and 15 minutes to get ready for the next thing. So I enjoyed both. It just kind of depends on the type of responsibility you want. Clippers, you don't have as much responsibility, but you have the more opportunities to really, like, I guess, sit down and think about, and I guess, like, indulge in what you're doing. Sparks, you have a ton of responsibilities, but you're constantly running. So if, like, you're someone that's like high stress, it probably isn't the best position for you, because it is always high stress. But again, I enjoyed both of them. Both of them really taught me just different things, and taught me how to, work in sports, and how to, like, manage myself, because you had to do that a lot.
What was it like to become the social media intern for USC?
Yeah. So unfortunately, the day that I started with USC was the day that the NBA shut down, which meant shortly after all of sports shut down. So a lot of my work was done virtually. I only got to go to, I want to say, like, 2 events as an intern at USC, just because it all had to be virtual for the time being due to COVID and just different COVID regulations. But it was a cool experience still, like, I still got to see and really know about so many different sports on campus. Again, like, of course, unfortunately, they pay attention, a lot of people just pay attention to the big ones, so it'd be basketball or football and stuff, but there's so many other sports that go on at USC, and there's so many other sports that are really, really good at USC that often don't get the recognition from, like, outsiders. And so for me, it was really cool that I got to learn, and I had to learn about so many different sports. I had no idea how lacrosse worked before I worked there, no idea how water polo worked before I worked there. So it really taught me about all the different sports there, and really gave me the opportunity to not necessarily focus on one thing, which was nice. When you work for, you know, the Sparks, when you work for the Clippers, your focus is on the Clippers, your focus is on the Sparks, versus this was all of USC athletics. So, like, one day we could be doing something for football, and then the next thing it's like we have to come up with something really cool, fun idea for lacrosse, or for women's volleyball and stuff. So I really enjoyed it. Wish it wasn't virtual, but there was nothing you could do about it. But it was a good experience, and really kind of taught me on, like, managing and overseeing and watching so many different sports and their socials.
What was it like for you to come back to Los Angeles Sparks as the PR and communications intern?
Yeah, so I'd actually been referred to the PR and communications department from a boss that I worked at when I worked for Tiger Woods. And he had told me that the coordinator there, her name is Natalie, she had worked for the same company at Tiger Woods that I did. And so he was like, if you really want something, like, I can set you up to talk to her, and that way, like, you can see if you want to apply for this position and stuff. And I wasn't 100% sure if I was going to, because I was just like, okay, I'm getting closer to graduation. Like, should I put something else on my plate? I had just gotten hired for the USC internship. So it was something where I'm like, okay, what should I do? And so I talked to her, and I really liked it. It sounded like a great position. So I ended up telling her, like, okay, I'm going to send you my resume, and I'm going to apply. And so I ended up getting it. And again, my start date actually came a month after we were in, like, quarantine. And so once that kind of came around, they were like, okay, we don't know how we're going to work things yet. Like, we don't have sports at this point. So, like, we can keep you guys on, and we're going to try to, but, like, we don't know what we're going to do next. And so the first few months were kind of, like, just weird, because none of us knew what was going on. No one knew if we were going to have sports or anything. And so we're like, okay, we're sports interns with no sports. What are we doing? Like, what do we do? And so that allowed us to honestly get a little bit creative and think about stuff. Okay, like, if sports does come back, how are we going to cover these athletes? How are we going to cover the games? How are we going to get people to want to cover them? And so we did a lot of, like, research during that time period. And And then kind of from there, then things came back and we got to do more again virtually at first. Now, since I've been there for a year now, we're back in person. But it really got us like a whole different experience. And so it was nice to come back. It was nice to like be with people that I had known and stuff. As soon as I applied, I got a message from my old boss being like, I saw you applied for like another department, and like totally joking with me and like was wishing me well and stuff, and said she'd put in a good word for me. But it was funny just to like how quickly, because how small Sparks was, she was like, I already found out you applied and stuff. But I was really excited to come back. I like the organization, and I like working in women's sports as well.
What are some of your roles and responsibilities while working as a public relations?
Yeah, so when it comes to the public relations side of things, again, a lot of it is that research aspect and that pitching aspect on like how are we going to get people to watch our games and cover them? How are we going to get people to want to do features on our players? And so that's a lot of not only learning about the player, learning about the teams, and then learning about the outlets. And so, like let's say we have like one of our players who's pretty popular is Taya Cooper, and she's become very popular as of recently, so it makes it a little bit easier to reach out to people because people can see like she's got a huge social media following and stuff. So but it's also finding out what is she like, like I don't want to say, hey, we're going to have her do this, thing about athletes and their dogs, and she doesn't have a dog, or she doesn't like dogs, or she's allergic to dogs. And so you really have to find out more about each individual player so that like you can guarantee that where you're pitching them to get interviews or on podcasts or having an article written about them, you need to make sure that that fits. And so we do a lot of research on the public relations side of just making sure that people fit within their what we're trying to get them for. Same with the team as a whole. We want the team, when they're covering them, we don't want to tell this team to feature us and then all they do in the article is like say how they don't like women's sports or stuff like that. And so you really have to do that research and find out what fits for both parties. So what fits for us as an organization and what fits for the people covering us, to make sure that if they're choosing to cover us and write about us, that like they're truly wanting to do it, they have a passion for learning about sports and women's sports in particular, and that they fit, their values align with the same values of the brand.
When it comes to the communications relationship side, what are some of the responsibilities when it comes to that?
Yeah, so for that, that's just a lot of different things. I mean, now in person, it's a little bit easier, but I mean, working this role, you're helping out with press conferences. So in person, if it wasn't COVID, we'd be helping and like making sure that the players are at this press conference and that we're setting up all the mics and getting everything ready. Virtually, it's a little bit different. It's just my boss who sets those up, but we have to make sure that we're either on the Zoom call or we're listening into the press conference so that we can transcribe the press conference and send out quotes, or quotes that will be used on our socials and quotes that'll be used in different articles that we're writing. And so doing that on game days, now that we're back in person and we're allowed to have media, a lot of it now is credentialing. And so making sure that, all these writers and reporters and stuff, they're getting their credential to get inside the arena, and they're also sitting where they need to be, sitting in the media section. And so running things around like that, I've been helping out with like making sure that everybody on the media side and on the player side has stats. So that's making sure that at every timeout, every end of the quarter, I'm sending stats down to the bench and I'm sending stats down to our media and making sure that they have access to all that stuff. Other things that we do is writing feature articles, writing articles about the team. So right now we have a show that we're doing for the 25th anniversary called Rooted in LA. And so before every episode of Rooted in LA, we talk and write an article about those players that are going to be featured on that show. So like I know like this this week coming up, I can't remember what two it is. I know one of them is Elena Beard. But so like we'll write an article about Elena Beard and her time at the Sparks and like what she did while she was there. Did she average, 15 points a game? What did she do? And so doing stuff like that, writing a lot, trying to think of other things. It really, because again, working for a women's basketball team, you're such a smaller team. It's again, two of my bosses. And for a while, it started out with like 5 or 6 of us interns, and then I was asked to stay on in the off season. So then once those interns left, it was my bosses and me. So we were a team of 3. And then up until probably a month or 2 ago, it was me and 2 other people, and then we just added 2 more on. And so it's not a very large team, and again, a lot of us is mostly interns, and so you are in charge of a lot. So I mean, there's so many things where my boss will just like message me, be like, hey, can you help out and build like this deck that we're going to present, and or like, hey, can you help out and collect some stats that we need for the upcoming game? And so it's very random what you have to do, as far as, one time you'll be writing an article and the next time you'll just be researching a bunch of stats. But there's so much to do, and like you really get to learn so many different sides of like both communications and PR.
Of course, when it comes to members of the media trying to get coaches, players, or even people on the staff, what is the process between getting them, and what are some of the guidelines?
Yeah, so it's really kind of all at discretion of the organization, my boss as being the head of PR, and then that individual person that you're trying to get, because there might be something that like you reach out and you say like, hey, we want to, like let's say Yahoo wants to do something on Derek Fisher, and so they write an email to my boss and they say, hey, we want to feature him on like, coaching through the pandemic or something like that. It gets put to my boss's email. He looks through it. He might have me, or he might research, or some of the other interns, whatever, research what this writer usually does. Like, do they cover women's sports a lot? Do they cover sports a lot? Or is this kind of like completely out of left field? They've never talked about this stuff before. And then kind of like, okay, what do they want to talk about? So it's like, okay, they want to talk about the pandemic, but are they going to are we going to just talk about him being a coach? Are we going to talk about like his personal life? Are we going to talk about the team and like what we're excited for? Because the whole point of PR is really, we're getting coverage for people that really want to talk and like be positive about the team and be positive about what we're doing. So it's like, so he'll look through it, and if he thinks it's a good article, a good feature, a good writer and everything like that, then it gets passed on to Derek and his agent, and then they'll go over it and like try to work it out. And it could be like Derek just doesn't have the time to sit down for 30 minutes, so sometimes stuff has to get scrapped till later, or he just is like, reach out to me in the off season and maybe we can talk about it, or different things like that. Or sometimes it could be just like he doesn't want to do it. Like there's so many times that players or coaches, whoever it is, it's just, again, they're so busy, they have so many things to focus on, that they're like, what, I don't have the time for right now, and most of the time, they're really willing to work, but it really, again, it kind of depends on, their schedule, what's going on and everything like that. And so, then it'll go through them. And so if he's like, yeah, I want to do it, let's go, then it'll go back to planning a time, working that out, and then that's when it goes into fruition. So it's a process, but again, it's just focusing on like, what are we doing? Do we have the time for it? Is it fitting what we want? Is it going to be positive for the team, or are they going to talk bad about the team? And so, and same with, do they have knowledge of women's sports? Are they willing to cover women's sports? And so it's a little bit of a process, but it's all just like, knocking out what fits and what doesn't, and what availability that players, coaches, higher up staff like GMs and stuff like that, what they have time for as well.
What is something that you learned now that you didn't know before working in public relations and communications?
I guess just the thought process is really one of them. There's so many times where, like, again, like, I'll see like a news channel or like a media outlet, and I'll be like, oh, that'd be so cool for the player to like do. Like, I love that. And then it'll be like, I'll be like, oh, we should do this. And then my boss will look into it and he'll be like, well, wait, like they have this thing that they did wrong, or like they have this that just doesn't align with our brand values, our core values of an organization. And so, like, you might just see something from the outside and you're like, that looks great. But like, you really have to do a lot of research, because the last thing you want is you get a player, a coach, a GM to go on this to go on this place for an interview, or to go on this place to have a feature article written about them, and then this media outlet just bashes the team, or has a bad history of just different things going on and stuff. And so I guess the biggest thing is just like learning to like really really research and pay attention to detail with like PR and communications. Like, you have to be so precise, because you can't give out the wrong information. Like, again, like, you can't say, hey, this person just scored 4,000 career points, and it's like, ooh, that was a mistake, actually they're still 5 points away. Like, that's a major thing to put out on a platform and to tell media and to send out in our press releases and stuff, and then it not be accurate. So it's just a really like big thing on like paying attention to detail, and again, just like making sure that like everything you're doing is only going to like uplift the organization.
What is some advice that you would give future people looking to get into public relations and communications on the professional sports level?
Yeah, I think a big thing is on the PR and communication side, having writing experience. A lot of times you don't think about it, because you're like, okay, why would I, if I'm doing PR, why am I writing like an article and stuff? But it happens a lot more than you think. And so having a lot of experience writing and writing about sports and stuff, like how like something for me with applying for this PR internship is they wanted to see writing samples. And so like you had to have, even if it wasn't something that got posted anywhere, but like you had to have a writing sample. I was lucky enough that when I worked for Tiger Woods, I had done a few writing pieces that got put on our website, and so like that helped me, and I had those previous writing samples. But maybe not everyone has that, because they haven't, this could be their first internship in sports. And so writing for things, again, like for me also, I was my major in undergrad was communication, and my emphasis was in PR. So having that experience is really helpful. So like it makes it a lot easier when you know about this stuff, because there's so many tips and tricks and things that how PR works. Again, how to write a press release, how to do media advisories and stuff like that. Stuff is not something that you'll necessarily learn about if you're in business, or you're doing something that's outside of communications. So I mean, if you are a business major but you think you want to get into PR, like learning those things, like really learning like the keys to like regular PR tactics. And then I feel like lastly is again, for me, what helped is like finding what you like and finding what you want to do, and then getting whatever internship for it. I mean, like, again, like it's nice if it's sports, but like if you have to do an internship in, a PR internship for a soda company or something like that in the time being, like it's still really valuable. For me, I had PR internships 2 different times that were in the entertainment industry. And so that helped me, because like I was able to have PR experience and also experience in entertainment, which is very different but very similar to sports in the way that it's just fast paced, it's never ending, it never stops. And so just finding, getting that valuable experience is also really necessary, even if your first one isn't in sports.
That's wonderful advice. Where can my listeners find you at on social media, along with the Los Angeles Sparks at?
Yes. So for the Sparks, their Instagram is LA_Sparks. I believe their Twitter is the same thing. Definitely follow them. Their content's really, really good. They're rolling out a bunch of new cool things this season. A big thing that we're doing on the PR communication side is actually on Twitter. We are live streaming all of our press conferences. And so that gives you a chance to see stuff that's usually not shown to the public. Honestly, our press conferences and media availabilities are usually only shown for media. And so you getting to see those press conferences on Twitter is super, super cool. So make sure you check those out. And then for myself, my Instagram is Taitana Marie _. My business, I guess, page that shows my photography and stuff is Tat Takes Pics. So it's TAT takes PICS. And then my Twitter is Tatiana with 2 A's at the end, L _. You can find me at LinkedIn, Taitana Lubanko, and I think that is it.
Thank you again, Taitana Lubanko, for your interview, and best of luck in your future with the LA Sparks as PR.
Thank you. I appreciate the time.
You can find Brandon Sports Talk on Facebook at Brandon Sports Talk, Instagram at Brandon Sports Talk, Twitter at Talk_Brandon, and you can find me on YouTube at Brandon Sports Talk. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Thank you again, Taitana, for your interview, and best of luck.
You've been watching Brandon Sports Talk. Please feel free to like, share, and subscribe to Brandon Sports Talk on social media and on YouTube.